thousands of other people who've got a similar story to me. I must acknowledge them, and it's a privilege to be able to tell you the story as I remember it, with acknowledgement to the other members of the armed forces who suffered in different ways. Now, it starts in 1942. I was a young kid and I joined the civil service, and I lived in a town called Runcorn, which is near Liverpool. And Liverpool got a severe hammering. In fact, they had the heaviest raid in Britain apart from London. And on the beginning of May, 1st to the 7th, Liverpool suffered its heaviest raid. And this is a surprise to you, possibly. I was in the messenger service, and the function was to carry messages to the various areas like ambulance, hospital and that, if there was down because of bombing. Right. And I was living in Runcorn, and a town called Helsby, 10 miles away. Now, at that time, the government had taken all the road signs down, and there was no lights on cars. So I had to cycle from Runcorn to Helsby, 10 miles away, to wait for the Queen's messengers. Have anybody heard of the Queen's messengers? Which were sent to distressed areas who had suffered heavy bombing. And so I had to meet them. They was coming up from the Midlands. And I got in the front lorry and guided them to Runcorn down the various roads. And that was my function. Now, that raid, I don't know if any of you know, on the 2nd of May, it suffered a heavy raid. And there was a house in number 102. It was destroyed. That was owned by somebody by the name of Adolf Hitler. It was Hitler's brother and his nephew, Philip. And that house was destroyed. And after the war, that area was made to commemorate a memorial for the dead of Liverpool. And it's just all grass now for that reason. I thought it's a bit of a diversion from what this is, but I thought you might like to know something. I don't know if anybody knew about Hitler having a half-brother in England. Well, but I don't know what happened to him, but that, I got it off the Wikipedia, and they've published it, and everybody in the area knows about it. And I think it's time it came out. Anyhow, after that, I went to, in the army, I went for a medical, and when I had a medical, they said, what did I want to go in? The Army, Navy or Air Force? I said, I want to go in the Air Force. Oh, what as? I said, well, can I go in air crew? Oh, yes, you can go in air crew, so we'll have to send you home again. So instead of being into the forces, I had to wait 12 months to be recruited to the RAF air crew, because all air crew are volunteers. Always have been. So we were volunteers and I had to wait to be called up. I was called up eventually, 12 months later, or 15 months later, and I went into Lord's cricket ground. So I eventually was called up and I went into the RAF Reserve, and they sent me to, after leaving Lord's cricket ground, I was sent to Sunderland, and from Sunderland I went to Bridlington. Now, I don't know what you realise, the flying uniform with flying boots and jacket and everything else are quite heavy. So what did we have to do? We had to learn that if we were shot down, we could get out of the aircraft and swim. So we was fully equipped with big boots and helmets and everything, and we went to a swimming pool on the top board and pushed in. And they hoped that we could swim to the side. If we didn't, we failed. Another thing happened to us then, but I managed to get to the side, struggling in somehow. Oh, I had a Mae West on. That was to help us to get to the side. And then after that, it was just hard work. After we'd finished at that was our square bashing. We did all our square bashing then, we didn't do any more, not in the rest of our service. And I was sent home on leave for 7 days, and I was posted. Now, when we was at London, all our crew were there. Gunners, wireless operators, navigators, pilots, and that. And then they separated them to go to different places. I was allocated to go to St Athan in South Wales, and wireless operators went somewhere else, and gunners went somewhere else. So that's how they allocated them from Lloyd's. So I went to a place called St Athan in South Wales and started my engineering training, and it was just flying and learning what to do and how to operate any aircraft. But halfway through that training, we then did type training, and they then said that they've got so many vacancies for Lancasters, some for Halifaxes, some for Stirlings, some for Catalina and Sunderland flying boats. I think there was one for Sunderland and one for Catalinas, and there was the same number for Halifax and Lancasters. There's a big rivalry between. But I couldn't go into Lancasters because you had to be over a certain height, 5'6", to be an engineer. And I was not 5'6". I was then told I'd have to go into Halifaxes because that was a shorter member. So I chose Halifaxes, and we then started doing type training, so that we was learning everything about a Halifax, fuel, everything on the engines and the aircraft itself, and how if your engine was on fire, you had a pickaxe and you had to push a hole through the side of the plane and climb along the wing with a fire extinguisher. It was very comical. And you put your parachute on just to save you if anything went wrong. And, oh dear. Well, I went to do my type training in Speke, and I lived at Runcorn, so that was handy. I could then I thought, go home I went there for 2 weeks. Oh no, you can't go home. So I couldn't go home for 2 weeks to Runcorn because of red tape. So anyhow, I went through the type training and I managed to get quite a high mark in engineering, about 85–90%. So it was very good, but you didn't do any square bashing. You just walked down to the lectures. It was and eventually I passed through and was told that we'd be allocated to a squadron in due course. Well, that was not very enlightening because I didn't know where the Halifaxes were. We found out that the Halifaxes, Air Ministry had put the Halifaxes in Yorkshire and Northumberland. The Lancasters went down to Lincolnshire. They was 300 miles farther, nearer to Germany, so therefore they had 300 miles for fuel. That's probably one reason why that Lancaster is favoured, because she had an easier run to Germany, about 300 to 400 miles, which converted into fuel is quite a bit, into weight, quite a bit. And so anyhow, the Lancasters, I never managed to get on a Lancaster, so I then went to Yorkshire, and it was quite interesting because it's quite a nice area, and it was at York, only about 10–15 miles, or 10 miles from York, so that was quite handy. But the trouble was that the Canadians and the British didn't get on, not the aircrew, because the Lancasters and the Canadians got better paid, and therefore they could entertain the girls. And the French, there was a French squadron there, and they didn't get paid much, but they got paid for every raid they did. So they took a lot of risks in flying. In fact, one time we was flying and the French plane was over us, right above us, on the bomb run. We was going into the bomb run and they were, and his bomb doors was open. I could see them. I told the pilot what was happening, so we did a second run, went round again. It's not funny, especially if you're over Cologne or that, and it's like a firework display around you with all the anti-aircraft bursting. Oh, but that's not to be. So we go round again, and no French there. So we dropped our bombs. And I did it 2 or 3 times, that was. Not that night, 2 or 3 of my raids. We'd have to look up, find out if the blinking blokes were over us. And they didn't worry, because they weren't over it. Nothing was over them. Oh, it was fun and games over Germany in those days. So, and anyhow, we got back, and another time we was coming back. There was we was flying a bit low, and it was when the doodle bugs were coming over, and the army was there to shoot the doodle bugs down. So they didn't worry about the RAF coming over, and we were going over Belgium, and the doodle bugs are being shot at, and they're being shot at us as well. Oh, the gunners were having a whale of a time, hoping to shoot everything that was flying over them. So we got back, and it was quite a comical experience getting over Germany. And one time we're coming back from, I think it was Berlin, and one of our bombs had got stuck up because it was frozen. So I said to the pilot, I was sitting next to him, I said, what are we going to do with this bomb? He said, what's that ahead? I said, it looks like a fire. So we looked a bit closer, and it was a farmhouse on fire. So he said, right, we'll do a bombing run on that. That was near Munich. So we did a bomb run, left, steady, left, steady, bomb gone. And the fire put the fire out. Oh, that's the sort of humorous life we enjoyed, because it was the only way to have a little bit of light-heartedness. It wasn't that we were against the Germans, we just wanted to enjoy ourselves one way or another. And so it was interesting, that. But we didn't find, in fact, most of our raids, and I did 18 raids, and then when I got back, I was then sent back to my squadron, even though I probably suffered from post-traumatic stress. We didn't even know that existed then. And so we got back, and one of our raids we got so badly damaged that we got rid of one of our engines, because one of the engines had lost its coolant, the oil, so it was seizing up, and the pilot and I decided that we'd get rid of the propeller. So there's only one way to get rid of it, and that's to overspeed it. So we put it into fast, switched the fuel off because we didn't want that, and it's quite frightening, that, because you can see the prop on either side, and it starts to bend, and it's bending back and back and back, and what can happen you don't know. It can either go up, down, or in, and if it went in, it would come into the pilot's cabin, and he'd suffer. But it did come, but we put it into a steep dive, and the prop went off, and it was over Lincoln. We gave them a present of a propeller. Another time, on that raid, we got back to base, and the pilot, he was quite a wag. In fact, he loved being a wag. And we said to the ground staff, he said, where do we park the plane? We've only got 3 engines. So the wife at control said, because she was a big buxom girl, she said, oh, put it between the hangars. He says, I'd love to put it between your hangars. Oh, no. This is the wing commander coming on. He said, please report to me when you land. So he didn't, the wing commander didn't think that funny. Anyhow,
I'll hold it for you.
So, anyhow, we got back. Sometimes we had to carry leaflets. I don't know what they wanted them for. So we'd toss them out over Germany, distribute them, and we've got several packs left. So I said to the pilot, hey, we've got a lot of leaflets left here. Oh, he says, let's give them give York a present. So we distributed all the leaflets of surrender to the people of York. Oh, we heard about it the next day. The police came to want to know who'd done it. Oh, but nothing happened. But another thing what we used to enjoy, and because the French squadron was at Elbington, that was outside York, and then farther on was our station. So the French got well paid because they got paid for every raid they did. So they volunteered for raids all the time, and with no worry. So we used to go into York because it was been edicted that the Canadians could go Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and we'd go Tuesday because there was no friendship between the Canadians and ourselves. And the French could go in any day. So we used to go into York and go to near the station. There was a taxi firm, and we used to go in there, ask for a taxi, and they say there's one now. Oh no, not yet. There's no French outside yet. So the French would come in, ask for a taxi, and they'd get in, but the taxi driver would only take two, because they got two more RAF ones. We used to get in the taxi, 4 of us, or 5 of us, and drive back to Elbington. They get charged for the whole raid, whole journey, and we got a free trip back to base. They could afford it. And so it was fun and games in some ways, but it was the only thing. And we used to enjoy it. And when we came back from a raid, we used to go into the bar and expect the barman at 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning to open the bar up. But he did. We'd kick the door down of the bar, open up and have a beer to celebrate and to commiserate with any plane that hadn't come back, because you knew who'd come and who hadn't. It was like a good spirit of comradeship. There was one raid we were coming back, and we saw a plane, and I saw the Aldi's lamp flashing, and it was to us, and it was sending a message, and he'd lost an engine and he got damaged, and he didn't think he could make it. And we got alongside, we slowed down, looked what it was a Lancaster, and we sent a message back on the Aldi's that we'd escort him back, and the 2 planes came back. We almost wingtip to wingtip until we got to the English coast, and he told us okay, and we flew off in our direction, and they flew wherever, but they got back safe and sound. So there was no animosity between the Lancasters and Halifaxes, but it was good friendship. But we just teased each other about how good a Halifax was compared to a Lancaster. But there is one big difference between the two, the Lancaster and the Halifax. The Lancaster could dive bomb. The Lancaster couldn't. If it started to dive bomb, his wings were off. And it was the same as the Hurricane and the Spitfire. The Hurricane was engineered The Spitfire was utility. And there was a big difference. The same for the Halifax. And it was much stronger. And it proved better for us, for me, that the Halifax wings didn't come off. Because we would have been in big trouble once. But it was a very enthralling experience. The critical raid, it was typical. You see, we used to do what was called mine laying. It was only certain crews could do what was called mine laying because they went out on their own, probably 4 or 5 planes, probably 10, 20 minutes apart, whilst the heavy bombing raids was in close contact. So if you were caught in a bombing raid by a fighter, the fighter would make a first pass and off to look for somebody else, because there's probably 800 or 500 planes around, and they could choose on that one. But if he was mine laying, no. If he found you, he would stay with you, right to the bitter end until you'd gone down. They'd hug you, because there's only 4 or 5 planes in a mine laying at a time. And when we were shot down, I'll tell that part before, we was 55 of us, because they was wanting to bomb the Graf Zeppelin. The Graf Zeppelin was an aircraft carrier as bigger than the Ark Royal. It was a big aircraft carrier, and it was being built at Stettin. And that was where my final raid was. But it was eventually found sunk outside Stettin, but it had never been commissioned. But we was that night detailed to hit the aircraft carrier, drop the mines where the aircraft carrier could be. And it was a mistake on Air Ministry, because it had never been finished, because the Germans didn't want, the army didn't Göring wanted to control the aircraft carrier, and the Navy wanted to control it. So that was why it never got finished. But it was a wonderful ship, the Graf Zeppelin. There was building 2. The second one was only in its infancy. But it was a very good aircraft carrier. If they'd have had it, it would have gone into the North Sea, and it's been published and stored. It's been found now in near Poland. The Russians got it. So the Germans, we used to go out, and I'll come to it in the second part. The Germans found us. And the night we were shot down, there was 55 aircraft went out, and 50 was shot down. And the next day, I heard the radio that, and this is those of you who heard the broadcasts, they would go something like that. Last night, there was a heavy raid on Western Germany, and all 50 of our planes were shot down. Also, mine-laying operations were carried out. That's what the BBC used to say. Our particular raid that night, there was no heavy raid on Western Germany, except 55 planes out mine laying. and the public thought it was a big, only 55 planes on a heavy raid, but it was only 55 planes, 50 planes out of 55. That was a big disaster. And the German, and the fighter that caught us got 5. Because what they did, and the Germans had a wonderful plane, the Engr, and it had upward firing cannon. So it was on the top, and it would get under a British plane and fire upwards. And that would get the bomb, because there was no gunners looking down. They was looking back and up. So you can see why it was a disaster. And the latest Halifax, the Mark 7, had, instead of 7 crew, only had 4. No gunners, no bomb aimer. And it was, as a result, faster than the fighters and went higher than the fighters, so therefore it was safe. It was a wonderful plane, the Halifax 7, but they only built 50 of them. It came at the end of the war, but it was a design which they could have. It had a powerful engine and a bigger bomb load, just because the gunners had gone with all their ammunition. You didn't carry them, but you didn't need them. But it was from a morale point of view that they had gunners. And because the crew wouldn't have felt satisfied without a gunner around them. But we didn't, and when I was flying, we never worried about the gunners. I only worried once when I wanted to go to the toilet. The toilet on the Halifax is at the back. So I wanted to go for a proper toilet. So I had to take my flying suit off, my harness, everything. And we was nearly over the target, but I thought I'd have diarrhea otherwise. I have it for 2 reasons. And so I got to the back of the plane and left everything. I just kept the microphone, the intercom, and anyhow I got back. But one of the things that there was one of our planes, not ours, one of our squadron, and they used to, when you drop the bombs, you open little doors and look down look down and see when the bombs had gone. And this friend of mine, he said that they'd take the hatches off, and he said instead of going down to check them properly, I used to lie on my stomach and put the torch down and have a look. And he said, but that particular night, the mascot of the squadron was a cat, and it had got on the plane. And when we was on the bomb run, the cat was half drunk, and it fell through the hole. So we gave them another present. But it was, quite a good experience. But it was quite, varied. And there was many episodes. We used to have what was called Fido. Our squadron was one of the few spaces where Fido. So it's called stands for fog intensive disposal of. So they'd down the runway they'd have these oil pipes and set them on fire. So when you was coming into land, it lifted the fog. And when you coming down, you've got the attack, but when you hit the fog, the plane automatically went up, so it was dangerous. And but we managed it all right. But one night when they had the Fido, American squadron wanted to come and land, so they came in, and they came to land, and about 6 of them couldn't make it because the nose lifted up, and with the Boeing 17, that was disastrous. So we had a lot of wreckages around us. But it was anyhow. What I think we'll do, the more interesting, possibly, that it will be in the second half.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you.
Sorry, not. Yes, no, it was Dresden. Sorry, I'm getting myself. It was to Dresden, the famous Dresden raid, and we got back. We took off about 8 o'clock, and we got back about 4 o'clock in the morning. Rather tired. I don't know why, because when we landed, we'd been in bed about 2 or 3 hours, and we got one of the orderlies woke us up and said that we was wanted for briefing. So we grumbled and said, what the heck, when are we going for briefing? Now, we'd land about 4 o'clock in the morning, so about 6 o'clock we're in the briefing room. And we're told that we're on mine laying that night. And it's not that we don't want to go do it, it was just that we had to listen to what they said. And we'd be taking off at 8 o'clock that night. And we'd just go and get a meal. So we was dead tired. I don't know if it was a result of that we got shot down, but eventually we had our meal, and the rear gunner gets into we take off, and it was another Air Ministry cock-up, this was. We were supposed to go low level. We'd been training low level flying, and we flew over the North Sea to Denmark. It was quite a mild night, no waves, thank goodness, and we was flying at 100 feet above the sea over the North Sea. It wasn't funny. I said to the pilot, what the heck do you want to the rear gunner? What the heck are you firing your guns for? He said, I always do. I said, you never have. He said, and the wireless operator confirmed that. And for the first time in the raids that we'd done, he'd never fired his guns as a test. Anyhow, if you know Denmark, that was where we was going. And we was going over at 150 feet. And when we got to the Danish coast, our instructions was to climb to 17,000. And as I said, Air Ministry can make a mistake. We flew straight over Grove. Grove was a Danish airfield. It was on the coast over in Jutland. And what Air Ministry should have known, it had just been commissioned to take night fighters. So what a wonderful prize we gave the Germans. 55 planes flying over Grove, and as a result the German fighters took off, followed them all over to Stettin. That was why we was caught. It was caught just outside Zeeland, where Copenhagen is on. And the rear gunner alerts us. I was sitting next to the pilot, and he alerts us that there's a German fighter 3-4 miles back. So the pilot immediately put it into a corkscrew, which, if you don't know what it is, it's down, up and down. And you go down about 500 and you come up. So we finished the corkscrew, and the rear gunner told us that we was clear, he was out of sight. At that same time, it was our turning point north of Copenhagen to turn south to Stettin. That particular raid, of the 50 that were shot down, only us landed on land. And if you look at the map, it goes from England to Denmark, then across Jutland, over water again, and then come down from Copenhagen to Stettin, and it's all the Baltic, all sea. And of that raid, 80% is over water. You can see there. Oh, where the D of Denmark, the Edom Denmark, was where Grove Airport was. And then we went over to Sweden and then down through. As you can see, it's quite a lot of water. So we turned down, and as we turned down, the rear gunner alerted us, fighter on tail. Well, we looked around, couldn't see it. No, he was underneath us. So suddenly I had a bang, and I told the pilot that we'd got hit, and there were 2 engines on fire. The pilot immediately put into a diving turn, which is go down, and it's quite steep, and you lose your feet and you float. But I managed to hold on, got in my seat, sat next to the pilot, and we tried our best. We told everybody to abandon plane, but what had happened was the rear gunner had disappeared, and the rest of the crew started to go, and I'd put the pilot's parachute on, because that was what we'd agreed, and I'd got 2 parachutes and put mine on, and the 2 of us were fighting to get the plane out of the dive and pulling it back. And as you can see there on that photograph, the plane had landed horizontal. If it had gone into a dive, there's a photograph somewhere of the plane coming down. But
I've not got a good one of that.
so anyhow, pardon?
I didn't manage to get a good one of that, Roy.
You've lost it.
Well, no, we've got it. I'll put it on later.
Okay, but there's showing the plane coming down vertical, and no, okay, and we got the plane out. I must have got out. I bailed out, and I lost my shoes. I had the old-fashioned flying boots, which was suede, but there was a zip at the front, and they was good. I loved them. And I lost my shoes. I landed in bare feet. I want to see that later. And the pilot, there is my parachute, where the arrow is, and that's the pilot, who was quite close. And yeah. So the pilot didn't make it. He was shot in the head by a German soldier, as the navigator was shot in the back. And they were a bit ruthless. Oh, that one. Yeah, and you see, what we didn't know, where we landed, there was a German observation tower about a quarter of a mile from where my pilots and I landed. And that was why they was able to get to him. And anyhow, he was a good pilot and he got a good record. So I landed all right. I'd got no shoes, as I said, and it was February and muddy. So I walked through the mud, as you could see, and there was a farmhouse which I was walking to. And I remember my training, don't go to the first farmhouse or house. So I went through the courtyard of the farmhouse, turned right, down to the main gate, got out, turned right, down the main road. I could see the plane burning furiously. It had landed near an old people's home. And I went down, and I saw about a quarter of a mile, I saw somebody standing at the gate. I went up to him and I said, RAF, bomb them. You know, kept on pointing to my stripes and bomb, yeah. I thought. Eventually he put his hand out and took me. That man there took me in. I give him full marks because the Germans, after 5 years, anybody that helped would have been shot. And he took me in his house with his wife and child there. Nothing happened to them ultimately, but that could have happened and they would have been shot. I give full mark to them. And I've met that girl since. And she was almost a disaster. So he took me in, and typical Danish hospitality, they gave me ham and eggs at about 11 o'clock at night, and she took me into the kitchen. My legs were cut, and I'd got a first aid kit, and I put the first kit on. I gave myself an injection of morphine because I was a bit shocked, and she put me upstairs to bed, and she came and took me in, and she was terrified, crying her eyes out, which I didn't know then, but I did know later. And the next morning, I get up, and I'm in the bedroom, and the window looking out, and one of the photographs you see is of the farmhouse, and the girl was there at the window and was wiping the snow, the frost off the window. I stopped her. I was annoyed because the Germans were nearby. I didn't want them to see me for obvious reason. So, the night before, at the night time, as she's doing my legs, I hear a noise outside, and I was carrying a commando knife in my leg, and it was there. I got it out. I thought, right, well, if there's anybody going to go, somebody's going to go before me. So I got the knife out, thinking that it was a German outside. Checked the door, and it was a cow. The cow didn't get hurt. So I put the knife back, and that was when then she took me to bed, and I got out, and so she was in tears in the morning, and she said, went outside, the milkman called. It turns out he was a member of the underground. This couple weren't. They was just friends. And he said, did you hear about last night? She said, she told him. He said, right, where is he? He's upstairs. So, get me down, get out of this house straight away, because it's dangerous in the house for the people that live there. So he took me into one of the barns, found a hayrick. I buried into the hay, into the snow, hay, about 2 or 3 feet down. And because if the Germans came, they'd go with the bayonets onto the straw. And so, anyhow, I didn't do it. I buried. And he said, look, I'll call for you tonight at 6 o'clock and take you to my house. So I stayed there, and later on I hear, RAF, help, I'm here. So I got out after a few persuasions because I didn't know who was saying. And I went down. And he said, look, I'm going back to the house now. I'll come tonight at 6 o'clock with a pair of shoes for you. And we'll get back, walk across, he said, only about a mile away. So I went back to my coven and stayed there. At 6 o'clock he came, and we then walked over the field, and that man followed us because my footprints were leaving a trail, and he followed behind us with a stick flattening the marks out in the mud. And we got to the farmhouse and got there about 7 o'clock. He put me to bed again, and in the morning his wife had been working on some of her husband's old clothes. I hope they were old ones. And he had made a new suit, and I'd still got my shirt on and things like that. And we got up, and he took me out of the house and put me in another room where the chickens were. So he'd got some box of eggs, and as we are there, 2 Germans walk up with rifles, and they were hungry, the Germans were, and they just took the eggs off him, and with shells and all, they ate the whole lot. They put the eggs in their mouth and ate the shells. And I picked up a wheelbarrow and walked that down away from them, because all these things we'd been trained on. So I went back, and he said, look, tonight, tomorrow morning, I'll meet you, we'll go out and get you on a train. I'd got a Danish money, so I gave him all that, no good to me. And next morning, we get on with size 14 shoes, because he couldn't, that was what he wore. And we didn't walk down the road, we walked on the inside of the hedge. And when we get down to a Falstaff or something like that, where it was a railway station, and we get on there, and he knew what time the train was coming, and so we get on, and we get in an empty compartment. So the train moves on, because we'd walked back, not the way to Copenhagen, that other way. So the German would be looking at those stations, not these stations. So apparently I didn't know that. So we get on the train, and the train moves on, and it stops at the station, which was near to where the crash was. And the carriage door opens, and 2 SS officers get in. I almost said, we don't want you. So one of them sat next to me with his blinking skull and crossbones sign, and I'm reading the paper. I'm reading it upside down. I didn't know that, and my guide was in the opposite corner, and he's going like this to me. So I realised. So I turn it upside down, and going from where we were towards Copenhagen, halfway is a place called Roskilde. And Roskilde is the German garrison town where all the German troops were. So the train stops at Roskilde, and these 2 SS blokes get off, and then when we moved off, they must have realised what they'd missed. But they'd been so interested in talking the night before, which I learned afterwards, they'd been fraternising with the Danish girls, and they'd had a night out with them. So they was probably reminiscing what they'd done to these Danish girls. So they didn't think about me, thank goodness. And so we carried on, and then my guide knew what had happened. He lived in America. He knew. Not that made them any better, but they let them get out, and then the train was stopping once more before Copenhagen. It's like, if you know, like the Great Northern Line coming down from Chester, it would stop at Watford before London, Euston. And that's what was happening here. That was the equivalent of Watford. And we got off there, and we got on a local train, which turned out to be providential, because when our train got into Copenhagen at its next stop. The platform next to us was our old train, and there was about 100 German troops searching everybody getting off that train. But we weren't stopped. We just got off, and I went up to a place called Royal Farms Garden. No, Costa Behaven, the Botanic Gardens. It was like Kew Gardens, and the milkman's brother-in-law was a professor of trees in the Arboretum. So he got 2 nice daughters. So he didn't want me in the house either. So the 2 of us, the girl, Engr, and I, went for a walk through the woods. And it was a walk, because we're walking down, and the Germans always did it in 2s. And so 2 German soldiers, ordinary soldiers, were coming along the path, and this Engr puts her arms around me and gives me a wonderful kiss, and the Germans looked at us and said, "Ah," and walked past. Thank goodness. So we had a little escape. Later that next day, we decided that they'd got in touch with Professor Engr, who's the head of the underground, and he came, picked me up, but didn't lift me, just took me into Copenhagen. And I smoked a lot then, and I'd still got some cigarettes in my pocket, so I'm smoking. And he said, "Put that cigarette out." I said, "It's a gold flake." He says, "I know, and you can't smoke English cigarettes here in Denmark. Put it out, because everybody knows it." So I put it out, we got out, went into some house in Copenhagen, and the head of the table, it was like a boardroom. There were about 4 of them there, sitting behind this desk. So they asked me a few questions and verification and that, and had I got any photographs, which I had. I'd got 6 photographs of me in plain clothes, and because all our crew carried them, and they took them off me, and they said, and they ran out of this room. I had to wait in the room, another room, sit down, have a cup of tea or coffee, and they came back with that. And I was now Peter Jensen, and I lived in Norra Farmsgade, and it's quite, even my date of birth correct, and so that made me easy to walk around Copenhagen, which was a false identity card, and so he took me to his house, met his wife, and by then I was smelling, because I hadn't had a wash for about 3 or 4 days with mud all over me. So they went into the bathroom, had a wonderful bath and a shave, and so then when I'd had a brush up, still with size 14 shoes, he got the right size. So he had my 14s and I had size 7s off him. And he said, I want to take you out. Well, he was quite an important person in the underground movement. And he took me down into Copenhagen itself, and he said, right, we'll go down here. As we go down, there's a roadblock, not a roadblock, a desk, and German soldiers there checking everybody for their identities. And just before it was a cinema. So we went in the cinema. He got some money, I suppose, and watched the film for about an hour, and then came out, and the Germans had moved their checkpoint, and we was able to walk down. And he said, you see that tall building there? He said, yeah, that's Shell House. I remember him saying it, that's Shell, because he could speak good English. He said, that's Shell House, that's Gestapo headquarters. I want you to study it. So I studied it, just looked around and saw it, and people going in, and apparently afterwards I realised that it had all the government officers who'd been captured there, and the Gestapo, and they'd put all the Danish officers on the top floors and the Gestapo on the bottom floor. So, or whatever. And then he said, you see what they're doing? Because apparently the British government realised, the German government realised that there's another Gestapo headquarters to be. There was one in Paris, one in Denmark, and one in Holland, these Gestapo headquarters. And all those three had been bombed and destroyed by the RAF. But this was missing. And that was so that's what I had to watch. Now, we then went back, looked at one or two other things, and he had a camera with him, and so he said, you're going off tomorrow. We're getting you to England. It's risky because we're putting you on the escape route, which was known as Gazelle, and used to go from Copenhagen to Sweden, and the Germans found it. So that escape route is out. But you're going on it. Thank you. So they had to work out a dummy, because the Germans were still using that boat to go from Copenhagen down to Bornholm the same way. But it was only for German or accredited people. So everybody, they had to check the people on and off the same identity. And I had to, now they couldn't put me, I hadn't got anybody to mimic for me. So by fiddling around with papers, they put me on the boat to go, and I had to get on as a sleeper. So I was put on the boat 2 hours or 3 hours before it sailed on the outside of the lifeboat. There it is, on the outside of the lifeboat, and it was waiting for German officers to get on to go to Bornholm. So that was what the plan was. It was quite a fair-sized boat. So eventually the Germans came on. I could hear them. And then when they'd been on for about an hour, the guide grabbed my legs out, got round the other side of the lifeboat. Because when the boat sailed, the searchlights came onto the boat, so they could see the outside of the boat where I had been. I hadn't taken anything with me, and the officers all stood back, and the Germans let the boat sail, and after it had sailed out of the area where the lights are off, they came and took me into his cabin, the captain did, and gave me a nice ham and eggs, nice meal, and let me sleep there. So in the morning, at 8 o'clock, I get off the boat, and British Embassy knew that I was coming because of the communication, and I get to Stockholm, into Malmö, where the boat was docked. Wasn't Malmö itself, it was farther down the coast. So I got on, and I saw the Swedish immigration officer, and he gave me permission to stay for 14 days or so, and it was quite good. So we get talking, and I said that okay, and they gave me the permission to stay. Well, when we finished with them, the Swedish authorities, he took me into Malmö, where his house was, or his office, and he took me into his office, and he said, close your eyes. I did, and he stood in front of the window, and then he whipped the curtains back. He said, I looked, it was just like Piccadilly. So many thousands of lights. And I'd not seen any lights for 4 years. No artificial lights or, the street lights, not a thing. It was mind-blowing. If you can just imagine it. It is really something. And he knew it. And anyhow, we had a meal, had a haircut, and he said, right, I'm getting you on the night sleeper to Stockholm. Now you'll be all right on the sleeper because you're on your own. So when you get to Stockholm, go to the British Embassy. Thank you. So I get on the train. I'm sitting there, sitting on the end. There's a bunk above me. And then the door opens. I thought, oh, what's happening now? A bloke comes in with his briefcase. Good noggin. I thought, what the heck are you? He said, you American? Yeah. So he got talking. I said, who are you? He said, I'm the German courier from Berlin. I thought, bloody hell. Where's my knife? Because the underground had taken it off me. They said that more use to them than me. I thought, well, God, I could have done with it now. And he got talking and telling me all about what was happening in Berlin, and he then sussed who I was. He says, you're not American. I said, why? He said, you're British. Oh, thank you. He was very sympathetic. He was very good. There's not many of them around at that time, but he just... So we had the night trip up to Stockholm, which was get there at 7 in the morning. It's about 8-hour journey, and I got to live with this bloke here in the top bunk. But he was quite decent. Because when we get to Stockholm, he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Where do you think?" He said, "To the British Embassy." I said, "That's right." He said, "All right, we'll get a taxi for you." Blinking German, courier, government officer. And he gets the taxi. I get out at the British Embassy. He takes us on to the German embassy, I suppose. You know, it's a wonderful world we live in. And so I go into the British Embassy and I tell them this, and they didn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. And that the consul down in Malmo was such an idiot to have allowed it to happen, because they thought I was coming on my own, and that he'd booked the whole compartment. But trying to save money, he booked only one seat. And I got two of them. But so anyhow, I got to the British Embassy, and they said, "Oh, well, whilst you're here, here's a present from the British Red Cross." I said, "What is it?" It was 200 gold flake. So, "Oh, thank you." So, "You can have those. Thank you." So, they took me, he said, "Well, you've got to have some clothes." So, they took me down to a store like Selfridges in Stockholm, and I had a suit, shirt, tie. Incidentally, after I got back to England, I got the bill for it. It's unbelievable. You know, they must be hard up. But, so anyhow, they got me clothed, and I went to the Grand Hotel in Stockholm, which was a big hotel. That was where I was. They put me up there. I got the bill for that as well. They never got it. So I'm sitting at the table, and a girl comes and sits next to me. I was in my new suit and a tie. So she said that, "Oh, have you got a cigarette?" I said, "Yeah." So I gave her, opened the pack and gave her a cigarette. "Can you spare a pack?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh dear." So I gave her a pack, because I got 200. And she said, "Oh, I'll be back in a minute." Oh no, what have I done now? So she disappears. So about 5 minutes later, she comes back. I said, "Oh." She said, "I fixed it." I said, "What?" "We've got a room for the night." I said, "Oh, no." Oh, no. What am I doing? Oh, dear. So, no more of that. I'll move on. So, I went back. I had to go to the embassy twice a day, just to tell them that I was still alive. So, I don't know if you know, Bomber Harris, he was a wing commander on my squadron, flying X-ray over Norway, and was shot down and escaped through through Norway to Sweden. That's Bomber Harris. He then became Air Vice Marshal, and he went to the same hotel, and I don't suppose he was charged for his suit either. And met the same two girls who were the daughters of one of the officers. So they said, we're going to a dance tonight. I said, okay. Do you like dancing? I said, yeah, I do. Good. Oh, come with us. So we went to the dance, and it's the Winter Palisade, Winter Gardens, and nice hotel, nice dance hall. So I'm sitting at our table. I didn't take any notice of our table because it was all middle-aged women. So I said, and the two girls had gone off dancing with somebody else. So I said, can anybody have a dance? Yeah, you can have a dance. Thank you. Yeah, and he was like that. Yeah, plenty of girls here. Go and have a dance with any of them. Thank you. I looked, and there was a nice blonde. Oh, very nice. So I said, okay. So I went over, asked her, can I have a dance? 9. Oh, come on, dance. So I grabbed her and picked her up. And she didn't want to get danced, but we did. And we had a dance. Well, I didn't look at their table, neither did I look at ours. Our table had got the Union Jack on it. Their table had the swastika on it. You know, I'm a bloody fool sometimes. So we had a dance, and thank goodness for British intelligence, so I've got their head screwed on. Because I'll go back to the table, having finished the dance, and they decided that they're going. I said, it's not finished. Yeah, we're going. So we went back to the hotel, and I went to bed about 11 o'clock. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a knocking on my door. I thought, one of those girls coming back. And no, it was my guide from the embassy. There's a plane for you tonight. You're taking off in the morning. And what they'd done and what they didn't know, and I found out afterwards, the embassy realised the Gestapo had got their tabs on me, and the Gestapo realised I got information about the Shell House, and they was got to get me back to England. So they took me to the airport, and there was I like London Airport or that. All the night flight times are there, except ours. That was blank because it was undercover, and it was carrying ball bearings, because that's what we're. And there's 4 escape routes, 4 routes to England, and the Mosquito was on one of them. So they put me in a flying bag, a bag, and no, that's the canal where I landed from. I'll tell that later. And so there was no sign of ours. All the others, there was Berlin for Lufthansa and British Airways to England, but not our plane. I was coming out undercover because it was carrying ball bearings. They took the ball bearings off and put me on. I'm not a ball bearing. So, and I flew in the bomb bay of a Mosquito. It's not funny, because in February it's cold, and flying at about 13 or 20,000 feet, it is very cold. And I got an electric suit on. And that was how I got back to Aberdeen. One of those routes, I don't know which one. We got back to Aberdeen. And we'd gone from Drommel. So it could have been any one of those. I don't know. And from Aberdeen, they put me on a night sleeper down to London, and they put two military police with me. They wouldn't speak to me. No, they'd just get me a cup of tea, and if I asked for it, and eventually we get to London. No conversation at all, except that customs, I got a magazine. It was a German magazine which showed bombing of London, etc. And I'd bought it just for novelty. So, and the customs took it off me because they can't bring that into England. So when I get to London, we go to St John's Wood, where MI7 was housed. MI7 deals with the likes of me, escapers. And so a wing commander comes out of his office, the two military police are standing there, and he comes over and shakes my hand and says that, welcome back. And they couldn't believe it, and they said, excuse me sir, but he's an invader. Yes, he's invaded Germans, not invaded British. He's not one of the, not absent without leave, although he is. And, so that was all finished. So I then get interviewed, and one nice officer comes to me and he says, what happened to that silver cigarette case you had that your father gave you when you were 21 or 18? No. And the cigarette lighter as well. So I cottoned on to what he was meaning. I said, yeah, okay. I sold those. Oh, he says, if we give you £50, you'll accept it, will you? Because what they were doing was giving me a reward for what I'd done. And so that was that. And I then went in front of a WAF officer who'd never been out of this country. And she said, oh, I've got your record here. It's, you've overspent your leave. You're allowed 5 days survivor's leave, but that's all. So can either give you leave now, or you can go back to your squadron. I thought, what's the alternative? She said, Carnaby. I don't know if anybody knows what Carnaby, if anybody was the RAF aircrew, who were all volunteers, decided he wants to give it up, they was put in the army straight away, in the Pioneer Corps. I said, no way are you going to get stripped and go into the Pioneer Corps. I'll go back to my squadron. So I went back to my squadron, and they were pleased to see me. Even the WAF officer that guided me where to park the plane. And so anyhow, they sent me on indefinite leave instead of, so I thought that was quite clever. So I went home, they gave me double rations for a month and indefinite leave. I'd only been home for 3 or 4 days, and police came round. They want you back at your squadron. And he's not here tonight. There was somebody who was in the varsity. That was the gliders over the Rhine. And I went to the squadron, and they were short of engineers on, because they'd lost a lot of them. And so we did varsity. That was dropping gliders over the Rhine at the end of the war. So we towed 2 gliders just over the Rhine, and came back, no trouble. And I got another I was in another crew, and because I hadn't finished my tour of 30, I started finishing my tour off. And that's what I did, because what I failed to mention, when those photographs I was taking of Copenhagen Gestapo headquarters were, when I got back to England, I was sent up to Carlisle, where they were training for the Gestapo headquarters bombing, which the RAF did. And it was called, that particular raid, it's called here it is. Yeah, according to the computer, it was the story of the World War II's most ambitious air raid was Copenhagen Gestapo headquarters. And Air Ministry, I don't know if you know the record of that, the RAF hit the Gestapo headquarters, but one plane hit a school. And that was next door to the Gestapo. That should never have happened, because when I went to Carlisle, that one crew was sick. And he didn't hear what I said. And that was, the Germans were planting trees down the highway, diverting it away from Gestapo headquarters to the school. That was planned by the Germans. And this man went sick, and he didn't hear my briefing, because the next day was the raid on Gestapo headquarters, and he went down the wrong route. And all the other planes went down the right route. Gestapo headquarters was destroyed. All the Gestapo were killed, and all the government officers got away. But the sad thing, there was about 200 kids killed in the school. I can't, I feel so angry about that, because they shouldn't have sent that one, a sick man. But they did. So I finished my flying with the RAF, and I then went in. When I came, I was demobbed on Class 2 release, which anybody knows, it was specialised people that came out early. And I was picked up by Penny, Lord Penny now. A bomb. And he became a lord. And he went to Woomera, and I joined him at Risley, Warrington, and down at Aldermaston, where I was on the trigger mechanism for the A-bomb. I was on the design of that, but I met my wife and I resigned. Other people got on and designed the trigger mechanism, but I always knew Lord Penny as Bill Penny. He was quite a character. I thought a lot of him. He was deaf in one ear. And when we was going round various offices, he'd say, "What they say?" He could see they was talking about him, and what do they say about me now? But anyhow, that's about the end.